Hello, my name's Julian Edgar and I'm the author of this book, Designing and Building a New Energy Efficient Home. What I want to cover in today's video is thermal mass. Thermal mass is absolutely critical to the performance of a passive solar home. Let's take a look. So you want to build a new energy efficient, comfortable and healthy house in Southern Australia. It's easy. It can be done quite cheaply, it's quite straightforward, and the results can be excellent, but you must be aware of thermal mass and you must get that right. So what is it and how does it work? So at its most basic, thermal mass controls temperature swings inside your house. If you think of how hot it gets outside in summer, you don't want it that hot inside your house. If you think of how cold it gets in winter outside, you don't want it to get as cold as that inside your house. So the outside temperature swings, you want to be moderated inside your house. So thermal mass does that. It does it better than almost anything else. It stops your house getting hot in summer. It knocks off the peak. And it stops it getting cold in winter. It knocks off the trough. So the swing of temperature inside your house is much, much less than the swing of temperature outside, which is exactly what you want. But what is it? And how can it achieve these wondrous outcomes? So thermal mass is anything at all that's inside the insulated envelope of the house that can store heat or cool. Now, sometimes the storing of cool is called the storing of coolth, but it's the same thing, storing of heat or storing of cool. Now, you might think, well, that sounds like a very complicated technical thing to be doing. Does it need a big machine to store the heat or store the cool? But no, it doesn't. Anything like a concrete slab floor can store heat and cool, or interior brick or concrete walls. Remember, they must be interior, they must be inside the insulated envelope of the house. So brick veneer, bricks on the outside don't do a thing. They can even be tanks of water that are heated and cooled inside the house. The really important thing about that list is it's easy, it's straightforward, it's cheap, and in fact often it's already included in the house that you are building. So the majority of houses in Southern Australia are built on concrete slab floors. That can become the thermal mass in your house. It just needs a little bit of care in how it's actually organised, but it need not cost you a cent more than you're already paying for the house. So how does it work? Next slide, summer. Okay, let's take summer. Outside, the day is getting hotter and hotter. 25, 28, 30, 35, maybe even 40 degrees Celsius outside. Inside, the house starts to warm up as well. You get some conduction through the walls, you get indirect radiation coming in through the windows, diffuse sunlight and so on. Now, the thermal mass absorbs that heat as it's developing inside the house. So the thermal mass, think of it as perhaps the concrete floor, gradually starts to warm up. It's getting heat absorbed from the air inside the house. Now, if it's taking heat from the air inside the house is no longer getting as hot as fast. It's cooling the house. So the thermal mass slowly rises in temperature, say from 20 to 21, maybe to 21.5. But because it can absorb so much energy, it's taking massive amounts of energy, massive amounts of heat from the air inside the house. And so the air inside the house warms only very slowly. Great, you've kept your house cooler during the day. You have not done a thing. The house has been doing it all entirely on its own. Forget the air conditioner, there's no air conditioner running. It's the heat being pulled out of the air inside the house and put into the thermal mass. Now, that means the thermal mass has got that heat stored and we've got to get rid of it. We've got to get rid of it before the next hot day, which is probably tomorrow. So what we do is we open the house up at night. We open the windows, we open the doors, we let the air from outside flow through and take the heat away from that thermal mass. Now, for thermal mass to work in summer, the night needs to be cooler than the day, and it needs to be cooler than the day by probably 10 or more degrees Celsius. So if it gets to 30 during the day, it needs to drop to at least 20 at night. That's the diurnal range, the difference between night and day temperatures. The higher the diurnal range, the better it will work. So you think of inland areas, it's not at all difficult in Australia to have a 20 degree diurnal range, 40 degrees during the day, 20 overnight. Okay, or 30 during the day, maybe even dropping to 10 overnight. So Canberra, for example, as a climate zone, has a lot of diurnal range, 15 to 20 degrees Celsius in summer. As you go to the coast, the diurnal range drops, but anywhere south of Brisbane, you have sufficient diurnal range in any Australian city for this to be effective. Thermal mass that keeps the house cooler in summer by absorbing that heat from inside the house. What about winter? In winter, the mechanism is different. In winter, as you would have seen in one of our earlier videos, we want the sunshine entering the house. We organise the windows, the orientation of the windows to the north. We organise the shading, the way we do the eaves, and so winter sun can come into the house, but summer sun is blocked. A major reason we want that winter sun come into the house is to warm the thermal mass. So think of it. You've got a concrete floor, it's covered in polished concrete, or it's covered in ceramic tiles. It cannot be covered in carpet because that would insulate it from inside the house. The sun is landing on the floor, it's warming it. That heat is going into the concrete slab, if we think of the thermal mass as being the concrete slab. Even if you've got sunshine flooding in, the temperature inside the house doesn't suddenly skyrocket because that heat is still being absorbed by the thermal mass. Okay, people sometimes say, gee, if you've got all these windows on the north and you're encouraging the sunshine to stream in winter, doesn't your house get stinking hot in the middle of winter? No, it doesn't, because that heat is being absorbed by the thermal mass. Come night time, temperature drops, the heat comes out of the thermal mass and warms the house. You don't do a thing except in the morning make sure you open the curtains so that the sunshine can come in. So to work, it needs the entrance of winter sunshine. Now we'll talk in a moment about what happens if it's a cloudy day and there's no sunshine, but think about the basic mechanisms. The warmth comes in via sunshine, it gets stored in the slab. When the inside of the house would otherwise cool, the slab automatically releases that heat. You don't have to do anything, you don't have to throw a switch or anything of that sort. Just as soon as the air inside the house gets cooler than the thermal mass, heat exchange immediately starts to occur. Now, this is why I talk about a passive solar home working with the climate. You can see in winter, we're working with winter sunshine. We're not just trying to block it out. And in summer, we're absorbing that heat and then getting rid of it at night through that cool air, again, working with the climate. All right, sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? So what are the advantages? The advantages are enormous. The most pronounced, clear, enormous advantage over any other approach to building an energy efficient home in southern Australia is it's usually free. So if your house was already going to have a concrete slab, excuse me, I'm so excited I swallowed. If your house is already going to have a concrete slab, all you need to do is to put some insulation around the edge of that slab when it's being poured. And that stops heat exchange going out to the air, which is otherwise the concrete slab is exposed to it. You don't even have to put insulation under the slab. All you have to do is to put edge insulation, which is really very, very cheap indeed. If you have brick walls inside your house, there you go, more thermal mass. If you decide to have a brick feature wall, for example. There's thermal mass inside the house. Again, you don't have to do anything except build it. So thermal mass is often free. It doesn't add anything to the cost of the house except very, very minor amounts like that edge insulation. Another enormous advantage of thermal mass is it's usually distributed throughout the house. Now, remember, in summer, it keeps the air inside the house cooler, and so it's keeping the air everywhere in the house cooler. If that's your slab floor absorbing heat, in every single room, the slab will be absorbing heat from the air. What that means is when you walk into a passive solar home in summer, it is cool throughout the house beautifully evenly. There's no cool room where there's an air conditioner working and it's hot when you go into another room. It is cool throughout the house with a beautiful diffuse evenness. In winter, everywhere it's warm. It's warm because the slab is warm throughout the house and it is exchanging heat with the air. And until we actually build a passive solar home, I'd never really thought about that. But it's this diffuse evenness of the temperature throughout the house, which I think is one of the bewitching aspects. It's silent. There's no roaring fan. There's nothing. It's just automatically exchanging heat or coolth with the air. It's seamless in its action. The bigger the difference in temperature between the air and the thermal mass, the bigger the exchange of heat that occurs, or coolness exchange that occurs. It just does it automatically by itself. So it's silent, it's seamless, it's distributed everywhere, and it's free. And they are just, in the real world, they are just enormous advantages. What about disadvantages? Disadvantages, it usually requires heavyweight construction. Now, you can get things which are good in terms of thermal mass that aren't heavy, but they tend to cost a lot more. And the cheapest things that will absorb a lot of heat or coolth are heavyweight. Concrete, brick, soil, things of that sort. Now, in most houses, that's of no consequence at all. If you're building a house that has to have a suspended wooden floor, then you start running into problems. But most houses in southern Australia are concrete on ground slabs, and there's no drama at all. You've already got the heavyweight construction there. In summer, thermal mass requires user action, and that is you need to do something to cool it at night. You need to open the house so that the cooler air can flow through and remove the heat from that thermal mass. The hotter the day, the more important it is that slab or whatever it is, the thermal mass, gets cooled that night. If it's not particularly hot in summer, it was only got to 25 degrees, you don't really have to do anything. But if it got to 45 degrees and the slab was keeping the inside of the house cool, then it's really important that the house get open that night so that the slab could be cooled. That heat removed. What about long hot spells or long cold spells? Now, people often think about thermal mass as acting on a daily basis. I absorb the heat in the day and therefore we've got to get rid of the heat that night. And that's basically what I was implying, isn't it? But it actually works over a longer period. In a house with good thermal mass, it's really working over a 4 or 5 day period. So in winter, if it was cool and cloudy for 3 or 4 or 5 days, then gradually the thermal mass will cease working as effectively as it did. And then you would just turn on a heater. Okay? Gradually, it'll use up the heat that has been stored within it. In summer, if you have a run of very hot days, 36, 37, 38, day after day after day, and you can't get rid of enough of that heat at night by night flush cooling, the slab, or whatever the thermal mass is, will gradually creep up a little bit in temperature, and you'll find the inside of the house gradually creeps up a little bit in temperature as well. But the slab, over 3 or 4 days of very hot weather, if it's opened at night, might go up only 1 or 1.5 degrees. And so the peak inside the house also goes up maybe a little bit more than that, but 1.5 to 2 degrees. So we're not talking about suddenly, after a run of 4 or 5 hot days, the house is suddenly 40 inside. It's nothing like that. It occurs quite slowly, progressively. But over a long hot spell or a long cold spell, it'll gradually lose the same degree of effectiveness. It'll be slightly less effective. That's the reality of it. Where's my next slide? Here it is. So we've been logging our passive solar home excuse me, we've been logging our passive solar home for 6 months. We've been logging it in spring and summer, and we did just a little bit of winter, but I'm waiting for the next winter before I publish the book. So here are some temperature records from within the house from the summer that has just gone. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 consecutive days, and it's important they're consecutive. Mid-afternoon, outside on the first day, it was 37 degrees. Inside, in the middle of the house, the common area we call it, it was 22.4. Now you might think, wow, you've got a lot of insulation. No, we've just got standard Matters 7-star insulation. 2.6 walls, 2.7 walls, something like that. 5 ceilings, normal double glazed windows, nothing exotic from Europe or anything like that. It's the thermal mass absorbing the heat, the slab inside the house, and a few other things I'll talk about in a minute. So on the first day, 37 degrees in mid-afternoon, 22 inside. The next day, 37.1, 23 inside. The next day, slightly cooler, 32 degrees outside, 24 inside. Now notice how the slab was warm slightly, and so the inside air temperature is about a degree higher, even though it's slightly cooler outside. But 24 is lovely. Next day, 37.7, 23 inside. And the next day, a very hot day, the hottest day we've experienced in the house, 44.7 outside, 24.9 mid-afternoon inside. The thermal mass is just stupendous in what it can achieve free of charge. Just amazing. Winter performance. As I say, the house hasn't been finished in winter, but this gives you an idea. Outside it was 0.5, nearly 0, and inside it was 18.5. And when you come inside from outside and it's 0.5 outside, 18.5 feels absolutely delightfully warm inside. That's the heat coming out of the concrete slab, and it's the same temperature throughout the house. So what is the thermal mass in our passive solar home? The vast majority is the concrete slab. And if you look on the left, get my mouse happening, there he is. You look on the left, it's a big concrete slab. It's specified as required by the engineer, who wanted 2 layers of mesh and beams, cast-in concrete beams, pillars that go down because it's on cut and fill. So it's a big lump of concrete. And around the outside, you can just see the 75mm XPS foam insulation, no foam underneath, just sitting on the ground, slab on ground, that improves its summer performance. So that was what the engineer said we needed, and that's what is providing the vast majority of our thermal mass. In other words, the reason I'm saying that is we made no change to it. The fact that it was acting as thermal mass, we made absolutely no change to what the engineer required be built anyway, except for adding that little bit of insulation around the outside. In our house, we also have some water that acts as thermal mass. Now, these tanks are full of water. We've got one in each of the 2 big end rooms in the house. They've got raked ceilings, so they've got a lot of air volume. And the software modelling showed those 2 end rooms getting a bit hot in summer, a bit hotter than I wanted. I'll talk about software modelling in another video. And so these tanks that we've made a feature with timber top, no tiles in the house when this was photographed. It does have tiles, or it will have tiles. This tank is 2,000 litres, so there is 2 tonnes of water there. Now, water works extraordinarily well as thermal mass. If you look up any of the classic passive solar design books and look at those houses, the 70s and the 80s in the US particularly, they often used 44-gallon drums of water, 200-litre drums of water. My lovely wife Georgina said we're not having drums of water in our house. So instead we've got this, what's normally a rainwater tank, a ColourBond rainwater tank, and you may not like it. Lots of people do like it. We've got so used to it we barely even notice it. So 2,000 litres of water. Water acts very well as thermal mass because it takes a lot of energy to change its temperature much more energy per kilogram of water than per kilogram of concrete. And because water can be mobile within the tank, it can flow, it develops its own little convection current, so it distributes the heat right throughout the water. Whereas in concrete, obviously the concrete can't flow after a set, and so the heat can only travel through conduction. So water is extremely effective as thermal mass. We did have the slab strengthened where those tanks are. There are 2 of those tanks because obviously it weighs 2 tonnes, and so it needed to be strengthened. It didn't cost any more. It was just another little beam that put in there. Or the cost was very minor. And in this room, the same room as the tank actually, we also have a brick feature wall. Now that brick feature wall wasn't put in there for thermal mass as such. It was put in there because we like the idea of having a feature wall made of old Canberra red bricks from the 30s, recycled ones. But because all of that wall is exposed to the air inside the house, it exchanges heat with the air automatically, don't do anything. And so that acts as thermal mass as well. The rest of the walls inside this house are just normal timber frame and plasterboard with insulation in them. So there's no real thermal mass in that, very little anyway. So the thermal mass in this house works astonishingly well. I can certainly say that definitely for summer, and I'm pretty confident it'll work very well in winter as well, providing that even diffuse heat throughout the house without the operators, the people living in the house, having to actually do anything at all, except open the house up in summer at night. Good passive solar design. Orientation, the direction that most windows face, which should be north. We know now why. We want to get that sun in winter to warm the thermal mass. It requires shading. We don't want that sun coming in summer. It requires ventilation so we can cool that thermal mass at night, as well as providing good air for breathing and as well as providing airflow to cool us as well. It needs thermal mass. I have never seen so much misinformation spread as I have seen about thermal mass. You know, people calling it thermal mess. It doesn't work after one day. It's just a massive amount of ignorance from people who really have no idea what they're talking about. And we've got one left on that list, and that is house layout. I will do a second video on thermal mass because, as I said, it's so misunderstood and there are lots of subtleties I'd like to bring in and discuss. I'll probably do that after I've done all these videos. I'll do house layout next. And remember, none of these need to cost anything. And that is so important because you read websites, you read information people are giving as advice, and it's always this expensive stuff, expensive ventilators and expensive insulation levels and expensive windows, all this stuff that's not actually needed, which can literally add hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to the cost of your house. Passive solar, it's about good fundamental design, not the sticking on of technological band-aids. The book's called Designing and Building a New Energy Efficient Home. It'll be out mid-late 2026 after I've got data logging for a full year of not only measuring the temperature inside the house, but I also measure the temperature of the thermal mass. I measure the temperature of the concrete slab. I measure the temperature of those water tanks as well, so you can actually see how they're exchanging heat with the air inside the house. It's absolutely fascinating to see that in action, but I want all that data in the book before I publish it. Thank you.